The truth about the UFO crash at Roswell. I'm the anger guy, and I'm going to tell you like it is. Reading the book, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. Doing hours of research on Google, writing 72 pages in my notebook as I was reading the book. Type in 2,938 words on 13 pages. I came to a conclusion. I seriously had to start all over again because I realized all the pieces of information in the book fit perfect to my thoughts, to the real truth about the UFO crash at Roswell. On July 4th, 1947, it was not a high-altitude weather balloon that crashed in Max Brazel's field that left 1 million square feet of debris that stretched 3/4 of a mile and a couple hundred feet wide. When I'm using the acronym UFO, it means to me exactly what it says. Unidentified flying object, not a flying saucer with little green men. I took information from the witnesses in the book about what the UFO looked like. With all the descriptions in mind, I came up with these drawings. First description I read mentioned the wings on the UFO were shaped like tapered bat wings. This picture took me over an hour to find. The book commented on the United States acquiring German aircraft, Russian technology, and then modified their own aircrafts and tested them out. This drawing of mine fits the dimensions people said how the UFO looked. You have to keep in mind at the time of the UFO crash at Roswell, and one of its areas was called Trinity, now called White Sands Missile Range, which was where the world's first nuclear explosions test on humans happened. Also, experimental crafts were designed, modified, and tested at Roswell. Talking about hiding in plain sight, one description of the UFO said from the side it was a crescent shape. Holding my dish remote upside down, imagining it had thin wings on the side, made it look like the description of the UFO. For me, when reading this book, the timeline was confusing. When studying this book, I kept notes in separate sections of my notebook titled Body of the Book, Threats, More Bullshit, and Facts. The title of More Bullshit means so many times the real truth about the crash in Roswell is right at the unlocked front door. All they have to do is open it and walk in, which means the truth is so close, but every truth presented failed from actual proof to justify the crash really happened. After page 182, this book covers it all, basically to ensure the reader how the information was acquired and by whom. They went to extreme measures to do this with 68 extra pages of documentation at the end of the book. After reading a few strange accounts in the book about the UFO crash near Roswell, the writers at the end of each strange account was discredited by the authors in this book by presenting facts. For people who are skeptics, which I hate to admit I wasn't until reading this book, here are my thoughts on a brief timeline of events before and during the UFO crash at Roswell. The immense amount of information I got from the book, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, helped me redirect my thinking of flying saucers and little green men. The brief timeline of the UFO crash at Roswell. Now, some of the following information will be about the aggregate rocket family. In the 1940s, the Nazi government and Russian agents were working together to bomb America. With that alliance, they started to build an A9, A10 rocket. After so many miles in flight, the Germans could not navigate the booster rocket, so to achieve their objective, they placed a smaller manned glide rocket, A9, inside the nose of the A10 booster. That A9 rocket would blast off from the nose of the A10 booster, and then the A9 manned rocket could navigate with a semi-kamikaze pilot to hit their target. Tuesday, July 1st, 1947, radars in Roswell, White Sands, and Alamogordo tracked an object that seemed to defy convention speeds and maneuvers they never seen before. They probably haven't seen these maneuvers because it's a modified rocket from the aggregate rocket family. Wednesday, July 2nd, 1947, at 9:50 p.m., Mr. and Mrs. Dan Wilmot seen an oval object like two inverted saucers faced mouth to mouth, passing over their house in Roswell, New Mexico. What they saw was a modified A9 rocket that will be shot out of the nose of a modified A-10 rocket. Thursday, July 3rd, 1947, at the White Sands Proving Ground, an attempted launch of the rocket never got off the pad because they were testing another modified rocket from the aggregate rocket family. Patrick Saunders, the right-hand man of the Colonel Blanchard at Roswell Base. The colonel was Patrick's best man at his wedding and was in charge to assign troops to the UFO crash in 1947. Saunders' daughter later said he changed serial numbers, changed files, and even destroyed files at the time of the UFO crash at Roswell. Patrick Saunders and most of the officers and enlisted men at Roswell were transferred off base by the year 1950. They exited through transfer, died, went AWOL, or ETS. Friday, July 4th, 1947, the first of the special flights from Washington arrives at Roswell Base. On the aircraft was Warrant Officer Robert Thomas, and his companions are in uniform upon arrival, but quickly changed into civilian clothes. When I was in the Army years ago, a warrant officer was generally a helicopter pilot. They mentioned he had companions, but not how many. In my judgment, at least two of Thomas's companions were surgeons and certified officers. 3 reasons why. First reason, the companions of the officer Thomas were people who no one knew except for maybe Colonel Stanford. Days later, one night when the nurse walked into an operating room at Roswell Hospital, she saw 3 bodies on the table, 2 dead and 1 barely alive. She didn't know the 2 doctors who were doing the autopsy on the bodies. They told her they needed her help immediately. The 2 doctors were working on a half-dead body. The odor of the cut-open bodies were letting a smell out from the bomb testing radiation burnt organs made the nurse half sick. That's why the dead bodies were wrapped in lead-lined body bags. My second reason is the doctors flew in because Roswell was performing results on bomb testing radiation or atomic testing on chimpanzees, which would cause loss of hair and loss of weight. Some organs inside the bodies were actually gone or disintegrated by the radiation. The doctor said it was probably from atrophied. People at the crash site and at the hospital saw a 4 to 5 foot creature walking. The creature's hands were down to their knees. The creature's length between its wrist to its elbow was longer than from its elbow to his shoulder. An average adult male chimpanzee is 4 foot 11 inches. The weight of an average adult male chimpanzee is between 88 and 154 pounds. Heavens knows what their weight would be after the bomb testing radiation was used on the chimpanzee's body. There were 5 creatures at the crash site, 2 outside and 3 in the aircraft. All of them had silver reflection suits which covered their heads that would protect the chimps against anything except gamma rays. This way the science data from chimps could actually reflect just gamma ray exposure, which is what they really was interested in, without the data being found by alpha and beta rays. They probably wasn't even given goggles during the flight because they were probably blinded or their vision was impaired by the radiation test. Hence, some descriptions of the creatures have sunken eyes. There is a book by Harold Rosberg titled Atomic Soldiers, American Victims of Nuclear Experiments. The third reason is the 2 unknown military doctors would lie about anything to help the military's agenda. Why would the military need a diversion, half-truths, outright lies, a fake story about a crashed weather balloon, or the military jumping the gun by saying aliens from outer space landed at Roswell Base in 1947? That statement about flying saucer landing at Roswell Base was soon recanted, but the story was out there, planted seeds of a flying saucer aliens in the public's mind. Maybe because the military didn't want the public to know about them testing bomb radiation on chimpanzees, or more than 1,000 nuclear tests to unwitting troops were exposed to vast amounts of ionizing radiation. What about the U.S. military using modified German and Russian aircraft to reuse them? Maybe a diversion was needed because the public outcry was making the military nervous because the U.S. bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or paranoid about communism spreading to thousands of Americans. To reach millions of Americans quickly, a group would say some Hollywood actors are affiliated with the Communist Party, and that's exactly what the government did. The crash in Roswell was simply a diversion because the military was using 3 giant radars and knew the aircraft caused because they seen an aircraft across their screen and disappeared July 1st, 1947. They reported the strange flight on July 1st, so why not investigate the crash on July 4th, 1947 right away? The military wanted to civilians to find a debris field in the crash site, which are at two different locations. That's weird. Where the impact site was, a group of archaeologists were on a dig finding the originality of Native Americans. I would imagine the university would have had to have a permit or license to organize a dig in that specific area. The military wanted the public to start speculating the UFO crash at Roswell was about aliens from another planet crashing on Earth to keep their minds off of the tragedies that was going on because of the military. Through illustrations, I will show you my thoughts on how 1 million square feet debris field, 3/4 mile long and a couple hundred feet would appear. With a large scorch mark on the desert floor appeared in the crash site, which are two different locations. Maybe that's why I was confused when people would mention different directions from Roswell in the book. The A-10 was built by Germans with Russian guidance system for the A-9, A-10 rocket to complete a transatlantic ballistic missile. The A-10 lost its navigation abilities after so many miles, so they built a smaller rocket, A-9, to fit in the nose of the A-10. This rocket would be piloted by a kamikaze, and he would direct this aircraft wherever he wanted. At Roswell, both the A-9 and A-10 were modified to be glide missiles. Proof A-10 was large enough to create a debris field 1 million square feet of different metals and plastic. The A-10 crashed or was blown up by someone using a detonate device. The A-9 was modified into a saucer shape, but before the A-10 exploded, it blasted the A-9 flying device out of its payload hull. A-9 flying aircraft took off in a semi-inclined position, leaving a scorch mark on the desert floor. The takeoff for the A-9 was quick, but it hit the mound of rock and dirt at the bottom, and it hit the bottom left of the aircraft, which changed the trajectory of the A-9 and made it go sliding down motion, hitting an embankment of dirt, crumbling the round nose of the aircraft. With both mishaps, the 1 million square feet debris field and the impact site were recreated and in different areas. The threats. William Curry Holt and his team of archaeologists were the first witnesses on the impact site, was threatened if they talked to anyone about what they seen. Their grants, government funding, and VA benefits could disappear. All the archaeologists were gathered up and taken to Roswell for a period of time. Whoa. Walt Whitmore, owner of KGFL radio station, was going to record a story from Max Brazel, farmer, the first person to see the debris field, but it was too late to air. In the meantime, Walt got a warning from FCC and part of the New Mexico congressional delegation. That wasn't the worst. Later, he was told he had 24 hours to find something else to do, and it shouldn't be in the radio business. Frank Arao at the table was told he would disappear if he said anything. Roy Musser was never to mention what he had seen to anyone, or both he and his family would be in jeopardy. Sheriff George said he was threatened to be killed along with the rest of his family if he talked about what he saw in the box from Mac Brazel, the farmer, or anything relating to the crash. Early in the investigation, he was left out of the loop with the government. After a year, decided not to run for sheriff anymore. At the base, a commander appeared with a statement for everyone to sign, which read, "No one should never talk about what the sergeant said or even mention it, because under a penalty law, it would be 20 years in jail and $20,000 fine." Later on, Dr. LeJeune Foster, a specialist in bone structure at another facility, conducted an autopsy on one of the bodies and found at the crash site, was told if she talked, she would lose her practice and be killed, in that order. Glenn Davis was threatened by people who said they would find his bones in the sand, which then they could be made into good dog food if he talked. The nurse who walked into the operating room that stunk like hell and helped the two unknown doctors with the autopsy of the creatures, and who talked to Glenn Davis about how she felt after seeing what was going on in the operating room, she did not show up for work at the hospital the following day. Glenn sent a letter to her former address, but it was returned reading, "Was deceased." Later on, rumors were heard she was on a plane with 5 other nurses on maneuvers, and the plane crashed. Some kids heard their parents talking about the debris field. Being kids, they went out the night and recovered some pieces and came back and hid them in the barn. Later on, they were found and was told if they don't hand the pieces over and never talk about what they found, they all would be taken out in the desert. No one would ever find them. One has to wonder what was so important about a weather balloon crash that the government had to threaten its own soldiers and citizens to make sure they never mentioned it. All the threats were made to reinforce the false idea aliens landed only in New Mexico, where military set off atomic bombs exposing innocent soldiers to radiation, and acquired aircraft from other countries to see the new metals, plastics, and technology they were using. More bullshit. I titled this section because every time I feel the book is going to tell me actual events by an actual person in 1947, 1950, it comes out that the information is to come from an older person saying they were there but cannot say anything about what they saw or heard. But we hear from other people 30 years after the incident. Sometimes we are reading about the second, third, and fourth hand-me-down person. I don't want to read while at the crash site like the two campers. They had weak batteries and their flashlights were fading, showing us fuzzy pictures. Some people were supposedly drunk, or the first-hand person is dead. Someone lost a hand drawing from Jesse Marcel, one of the first military personnel on the crash site. After 30 years, drew a picture of what the UFO passenger looked like, and the couple lost that drawing. A person living in Jesse Marcel's house today will not allow people coming to his house to look around. Almost right there, again, empty-handed. A friend of Jesse Marcel was visiting him. Jesse told him he hid some metal items from this crash site in the hot water heater in the basement. The man started to unscrew the thin top lid of the hot water heater. Then he heard people come in Jesse's front door, so the man stopped unscrewing the top. The man said he left and had to leave to work offshore and was gone for 160 days. When he came back, he soon went back to see Jesse, but he died in the meantime. A woman dying of cancer told Mary Ann Gardner, an anthropologist in the late 1970s, she'd seen the crash site of the UFOs and the two bodies. The two campers, Ragsdale and Truelove, who went and saw the crash site after the flash went across the sky, the military started to show up, so they got into their truck and left. They had parts from the crash site in the back of their truck, so they figured they would get in trouble if the military caught them. So they stopped the truck, threw all the items out, and took off. Jesus. Ragsdale seen two bodies around the UFO, 4 or 5 feet long. An average adult chimpanzee is 4 feet 11 inches. People found material that could form into any shape and would stay in that shape. Silly Pully was discovered in 1943. It was introduced in 1950. The provost marshal at Roswell, which was primary advisor on all issues related to force protection, law enforcement, anti-terrorism. Dr. Jesse B. Johnson Jr. did an autopsy from another military base on 3 bodies from the crash site and said nothing in short time he lived because he died before being interviewed. Holden, the head archaeologist, admitted he was there but could not remember anything he saw that night. Years later, they checked 3 universities in the distance from Roswell that had archaeologist digs in Roswell. They could not find any records of any archaeologist digs down by the 3 universities' research in Roswell area. On February 3rd, 2023, a high-altitude balloon was spotted over Montana. First word from the news station said the balloon spotted was a high-weather balloon. Then afterwards, the news outlet said the payload was so small it could not retain very much data. I laughed out loud because I knew damn well someone was lying to the public. Just like on July 8, 1947 at 10 p.m., ABC News headline edition tells the audience that General Roger Ramey has identified the Roswell wreckage as a weather balloon. Later in February 2023, news stations were saying the payload of the weather balloon was too small to hold any data. What bullshit is that? Today there are thumb drives that can hold 1 terabyte. That is an extremely large amount of latitude, longitude data points, plus along with thousands of pictures. After the United States military shot that high weather balloon down, they discovered the payload of the high weather balloon over Montana was 3 school buses long. Found new information right off the bat about Roswell just by reading the inside dust cover. Even the first man, Max Brazel, who was first to find the debris, was a farmer all his life. He knew darn well it was no pieces of the weather balloon. After July 4th, 1947, UFO crashed in Roswell. Most all military people that were stationed at Roswell were transferred to other bases, even the officers, by 1950. The military took pictures and movies of the debris field and crash site. Where are they now? Major Jesse Marcel was a big deal, but the military needed an scapegoat, and that was Jesse. The different metals found explain metals take different shape after being crumpled up. Nitinol, nickel and titanium alloy has shape memory. Petrified wood would feel like wood and is very magnetic. Other alloys have shape memory such as copper, zinc and aluminum and nickel and manganese, and silicon. On 1978, Major Jesse Marcel finally admitted debris he saw on July 1947 was not a weather balloon, almost 30 years after the crash. With all of the planets, stars, galaxies, and other forms of matter and energy in the universe, I still believe there are other forms of life somewhere, but not on July 4th, 1947. On that date, it was just a magic term called misdirection from the government, like one president had Martha Stewart put in jail. Remember that? Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate your viewing and value your comments. Thank you.
Dad looked up in the west and saw an object that came down and had lights blinking, and it was rather frightening to him.
In 1947, Paul Wilmot's elderly parents were sitting on their porch when they were sure they saw a flying saucer.
Then all of a sudden it seemed to rock a little bit and sort of counterbalanced itself, wiggle a little bit, then seemed to settle down and take off at a rapid rate of speed.